A soft drizzle fell across Evergreen County, the kind of gray, bone-chilling rain that makes the sky feel heavier than it should. Droplets streaked down the grimy windows of the county animal shelter, turning the world outside into a blurred painting of bare trees and wet concrete. The shelter itself was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of cages and the low hum of tired fluorescent lights. In kennel number 12 lay Lincoln, an old dog with fur the color of worn silver, matted here and there with mud. His body looked tired, shoulders sagging, and his paws curled under as if he wanted to disappear into the corner. But his eyes told a different story. They were calm, steady, and touched with a dignity that no amount of loss could erase. Lincoln had not barked in weeks. The staff whispered that he had stopped making a sound the day his only companion, the woman who once cared for him, passed away. Lincoln understood in that silent way old dogs always understand that his season had ended. He had lived, he had loved, and now he was waiting for time to take the rest of him. Who would want a creature so worn down, so visibly carrying the weight of years? Families came and went, laughing at the sight of puppies tumbling over one another, pointing at sleek young dogs with bright coats and wagging tails. No one paused at Kennel 12. But on that gray afternoon, someone did. Susan stood there, her coat damp from the rain, her face lined with the kind of fatigue that comes from more than just sleepless nights. She had spent weeks searching shelters, her heart torn by every empty hope, but her journey wasn't for herself. She was looking for someone for her daughter, Chloe. Chloe was 12 years old, small for her age, and fragile in a way that words could hardly capture. Born with brittle bone disease, her body could shatter with the slightest fall or even a harsh bump. Her life was confined to a wheelchair, confined to safety, confined within 4 walls that seemed to close in tighter with each passing year. Susan carried the burden of watching her daughter's world shrink. What hurt most was not the physical pain, but the silence. Chloe didn't laugh anymore. She didn't chatter or daydream out loud like other children. She had grown quiet. Her eyes dulled, as if childhood itself had been taken from her. Susan had tried everything: new books, new toys, even special trips, but nothing could ignite the spark again. Deep inside, she knew Chloe needed more than distraction. She needed connection. And then, in the dim light of Kennel 12, Susan saw Lincoln. He was not the dog anyone else would choose. He was not young, not strong, his body heavy with age. Yet there was something in his eyes, something that made Susan pause. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, as if this dog carried the same quiet ache she saw in her daughter. A kind of sorrow that had lived long enough to become wisdom, softened by time. Susan bent to her knees, her voice no more than a whisper. "Sweetheart, this is Lincoln. Do you want to meet him?" At first, there was nothing. Chloe sat still, her small hands resting in her lap, her eyes unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. It was so slight that Susan almost missed it. The wheelchair rolled forward with a faint creak. Before they could reach the bars, a dog in the next kennel exploded in barks, sharp and frantic, echoing through the shelter's corridors. Susan's heart jumped. She feared Chloe would startle, would pull away in fear. But Lincoln stood, slowly but with purpose. His frame was tired, yet his presence filled the space. He gave a single deep growl, low and commanding. Not wild, not vicious, just enough to quiet the storm. and quiet it became. The barking ceased. The shelter hushed. In that stillness, Chloe and Lincoln looked at one another, his eyes heavy with sorrow, yet steady, locked with hers, small, fragile, but unafraid. Something invisible crossed between them, something no words could capture. Lincoln stepped forward, pressing his nose against the cold iron bars. Chloe reached out her hand, trembling. Her fingers were so delicate, as if made of glass. Lincoln didn't sniff or shy away. Instead, he bent his head and touched her hand with the gentlest lick, careful, as though he knew exactly how fragile she was. It was not just a touch. It was a promise. And in that moment, something stirred in his chest. A warmth he thought had long since vanished. Hope. That evening, Lincoln walked out of the shelter beside Susan and Chloe. There were no cheers, no goodbyes, no barking farewells. Just an old dog stepping into a new beginning. The house they brought him to wasn't large. A small home in the quiet edge of town where wind rustled through the trees and the faint smell of bread baking drifted from the kitchen. But to Lincoln, it was everything, because Chloe was there. Chloe couldn't take him for long walks, couldn't throw a ball across the yard. But she talked. She talked about astronauts in space, about amusement parks she had only seen in pictures, about dreams too fragile to share with anyone else. And Lincoln listened, always listened. His tired eyes softened, his ears tilted, and sometimes when she reached the part of a story where hope lived, his tail gave the faintest wag. At night, when rain tapped gently against the roof, Chloe placed her small hand on Lincoln's back. He would lie still, his breath deep and slow, as if he understood that his presence alone was enough. Neither of them had the words to name what was happening, but both of them knew deep inside that something had begun, something that would change them forever. From the moment Lincoln came home with Chloe, it was as if life returned to his tired old frame. No longer did he lie silently in a dark corner as he once had at the shelter. Now, each morning, he positioned himself faithfully outside Chloe's bedroom door, ears perked to the sound of her wheelchair wheels clattering softly on the hardwood floor, tail giving a gentle wag like a quiet ceremony welcoming the new day. And Chloe, too, began to change. She spoke more, laughed more, and for the first time in a long time, the house echoed with her voice. At breakfast, she always tore off half a piece of her buttered muffin and slipped it to Lincoln, even though her mother reminded her again and again, honey dogs aren't supposed to eat sweets. Chloe would simply grin and whisper back, Lincoln is the exception. Afternoons became their favorite time together. They would rest under the porch roof, where sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long patterns across the grass. Chloe told Lincoln her dreams, how she wanted to become a veterinarian one day, how she hoped she might walk again just once, so she could take him to the park like the other kids. Lincoln never interrupted, never judged, only listened. His head tilted, his eyes soft, his tail flicking every now and then, as if he were agreeing with every single word. But not every day was gentle. One spring afternoon, while her mother stepped outside to collect the mail, Chloe's mischievous streak took hold. She decided it was time to train Lincoln like a circus dog. She placed a bright hula hoop in the middle of the living room and pointed dramatically. "Come on, Lincoln. Jump through." Lincoln stared at the hoop, then at Chloe, and then carefully stepped around it instead of through. "No, not like that. Chloe protested, pouting. "You're supposed to leap!" She demonstrated with her hands, laughing at her own boldness. After several failed attempts, she leaned forward in her wheelchair, trying to show him what she meant. And then snap. A sharp crack echoed through the quiet house. Chloe's face tightened in pain, her hands gripping the sides of her chair as tears welled in her eyes. Lincoln barked immediately, loud and urgent, his paws scrambling as he dashed toward the kitchen. Susan dropped the dishes she had been washing and rushed in, finding Chloe, trembling, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lincoln wouldn't stop barking, his gaze locked on Chloe's face, as if begging Susan to understand. Susan scooped her daughter gently into her arms. Chloe's body felt too limp, her breath catching in small sobs. Later, the doctor confirmed it was a small fracture in her wrist, not severe, but it required a splint and strict rest. The next 2 days were harder than any storm. Chloe refused to speak to Lincoln. Whenever he patted over, she turned her face away. Lincoln, confused and worried, lay silently at the wheels of her chair, waiting for forgiveness he couldn't ask for in words. On the third night, the weather turned. A spring storm gathered, and soon thunder boomed across the sky. The small house shivered with each crash of lightning, the wind howling through the cracks. Susan lit candles and searched for flashlights, and then with a sudden flicker, the power went out. Darkness fell heavy over every corner. Chloe sat stiffly in her chair, fear coiling inside her. Thunder terrified her. The booming noise sent sharp pain through her fragile body, each startle making her wince. Her voice quivered barely above a whisper. "Lincoln." No answer. "Lincoln," she called again, her words trembling. Just then a cold gust swept through the kitchen. She turned, and her heart froze. The back door had blown open. Lincoln was gone. Susan grabbed her coat, panic rising. She and Chloe called into the storm voices, torn by wind and rain, but no familiar bark came back. Only thunder. Only silence. Chloe sobbed, clutching her splinted wrist. "I shouldn't have been mad at him," she cried into the night. "I'm sorry, Lincoln. Please come back." Nearly an hour later, when the storm had finally begun to ease, a knock sounded at the door. Susan opened it to find a young animal control worker standing in the rain, holding a leash. On the other end stood Lincoln-drenched, muddy chest heaving with exhaustion. The man explained, "I found him running in circles out on the street, barking his head off like he was looking for someone. When I got close, he pulled me straight here." Before the man could say more, Chloe rolled forward, tears shining in her eyes. She didn't care about the splint, didn't care about the mud. She threw her arms open and Lincoln lunged toward her, pressing his soaked head into her chest, panting hard, heart racing like he had crossed miles of storm just to find her. "I'm sorry," Chloe whispered into his ear, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. Don't leave me again." Lincoln made no reply, only laid his heavy head in her lap, his tail giving a slow, tired wag. That night when the lights finally flickered back on, Lincoln lay curled by Chloe's bed. Outside, the storm had passed. The air was clean, the sky washed quiet. Chloe pulled her star-patterned birthday blanket closer, then leaned over the side of her bed and draped a corner of it gently across Lincoln's back. Her voice was soft, almost like a vow. "From now on, we're a team, no matter what happens." Lincoln gave a single low bark. Agreement. And in that small house with the storm behind them, a fragile girl and an old dog found a promise worth holding on to. After that great storm, something inside Chloe seemed to shift. She was no longer the quiet child who kept everything locked away. Her eyes carried a brightness that hadn't been there before, a spark of life returning after years of silence. It was as if the thunder and the rain had shaken loose a piece of her that had been buried deep, and through the fear she had discovered a kind of strength she hadn't known she still possessed. Lincoln stayed close to her every moment like a shadow that never left her side. Whether she was in the kitchen, in her bedroom, or sitting under the porch roof, the old dog was there. Loyal, silent, steady, he seemed to know that his very presence was enough. He became her anchor, her safety, her comfort. One bright morning in early May, when the spring sun finally began to warm the damp ground after weeks of rain, Susan sat down at the breakfast table with a thoughtful smile. She looked at her daughter, then spoke softly. "Chloe, your birthday is coming soon. This year I'd like to do something special. What do you think?" In the past, Chloe always shook her head. Birthdays reminded her of the things she couldn't do, the cakes she couldn't stand to blow candles on, the gifts she couldn't open without help, the parties where she felt more like an object of pity than a guest of honor. She never wanted a celebration, never wanted the spotlight on her differences. But this year felt different. Her eyes drifted to Lincoln, stretched out in a patch of sunlight by the window. His 4 legs were sprawled, his belly exposed the picture of trust and comfort. Something about the sight made Chloe's lips curve upward just a little. She nodded slowly. "I want to have a birthday party." For a second, Susan froze. Then her eyes filled with tears as she broke into a smile. "Then we'll make it a wonderful one, sweetheart." The big day arrived, and the little house buzzed with an energy it had never known before. Ribbons crisscrossed the living room, balloons floated near the ceiling, some shaped like stars and others like dog bones. On the table sat a cake-white frosting carefully decorated with the words, "Happy Birthday." Chloe and Lincoln, too. Neighbors came by, bringing small gifts wrapped with care. But the gift that touched Chloe most wasn't for her at all. It was for Lincoln. A girl named Ruby, who lived down the street, handed Chloe a yellow scarf she had knitted herself. "It's for Lincoln," she said shyly, "so he won't get cold when you take him outside." Lincoln, draped in his new scarf, walked through the room like a gentleman at a ball. He accepted pats on the head-tail, wagging politely, pausing by each guest, as if to thank them for coming. For once, Chloe wasn't the girl in the wheelchair everyone worried over. She was the girl with the special dog, the girl who smiled and laughed and told stories. She talked about astronauts, about her online school, about how Lincoln could tell the difference between salty crackers and sweet cookies. The guests chuckled, listening intently, and Susan watched her daughter glow with pride. At last, it was time for the cake. Susan set it on the table before Chloe lit a single candle and dimmed the lights. Everyone hushed. Chloe didn't shrink back this time. She sat tall, her eyes fixed on the tiny flame dancing above the frosting. Susan bent down and whispered, "What's your wish, sweetheart?" Chloe's eyes flicked to her mother, then to Lincoln, sitting faithfully at her side, his yellow scarf bright against his gray fur. She closed her eyes, let the silence settle, and whispered, "I wish I'll always have Lincoln by my side." Then she leaned forward and blew gently. The flame vanished. At that moment, Lincoln let out a small bark, sharp but gentle, as if sealing the promise himself. The room erupted in cheers. Later, after the guests had gone and the laughter had faded, Chloe rested on the sofa with a warm blanket tucked across her lap. The kitchen still smelled of frosting and candle wax, and half-eaten slices of cake lingered on the counter. Lincoln rested his head on her knees, eyes half closed. From the kitchen, Susan's voice carried over the clink of dishes. "You were so brave today, Chloe, and so radiant." Chloe stroked Lincoln's fur, her eyes shining in the glow of the lamp. "I don't feel so lost anymore, Mom." Susan came and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pressing her cheek to Chloe's hair. I'm proud of you more than you'll ever know." That night, as the house settled into quiet, Chloe lay in bed. The balloons bobbed gently in the corner, the blanket with star prints pulled to her chin. She reached out, placing her small hand on Lincoln's back. "You know something," she whispered. "This is the first birthday I've ever felt truly happy." Lincoln gave no words, only a slow wag of his tail. But for Chloe, that was more than enough. In that small house, with the wind whispering through the cracks and the faint smell of cake still in the air, a little girl learned to believe in tomorrow. And all it took was the simple, steady love of an old dog who had once been forgotten, but now was everything. Summer crept in slowly with sudden showers that left the sidewalks steaming, and long afternoons of sunlight pressing hard against the roof of the little house where Chloe and Lincoln lived. On the surface, everything seemed steady, as if life had finally found its rhythm. But life has a way of turning without warning. One quiet afternoon, while the air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, Chloe clutched her chest. A sharp pain twisted through her small body, and her lips turned pale, her breathing shallow and ragged. Susan's heart nearly stopped. She grabbed the phone, her voice trembling as she called for an ambulance. Lincoln barked wildly, circling the wheelchair, his nails clicking frantically on the floor, as if he could drive the danger away with sheer force of will. When the paramedics lifted Chloe into their arms, Lincoln leapt after them. He pawed at the ambulance door claws, scraping metal as it slammed shut. Sirens wailed, lights flashing against the wet pavement, and in a blink the vehicle disappeared into the night. Lincoln stood in the street, drenched in red and blue barking, until his throat ached. But the girl he loved was gone. At the hospital, Chloe was diagnosed with a severe case of pneumonia. She would need to stay at least 2 weeks. Susan sat by her bedside, gripping her fragile hand, whispering comfort through her own fear. And Chloe, her voice thin and weak, asked only one question. "Where's Lincoln?" Back at the house. Lincoln became a statue. He refused food, refused water, barely slept. He sat by the door as if carved from stone. Each time a car passed outside, his ears lifted, and he lunged forward, desperate to see Chloe's face again. At night, he dragged the star-print blanket from her bed and curled himself around it, breathing in the fading scent of the little girl who was his whole world. 3 days passed, then 4. By the 5th night, when Susan came home briefly to collect Chloe's things, Lincoln searched her face. No Chloe, no sound of her voice. The old dog did not bark, did not cry. He simply slipped into the darkness when no one was looking. By morning, Susan realized he was gone. Panic surged through her. She ran the streets calling his name until her voice cracked. She plastered the neighborhood with flyers. Missing dog. Name Lincoln. Very friendly. But there was no trace of him. He wasn't at the park. He wasn't at the shelter. He wasn't anywhere familiar. Because Lincoln wasn't searching for the past. He was searching for the future. He was searching for Chloe. Somehow, through instinct memory, or a bond that defied reason, Lincoln began his impossible journey. He followed faint scents along the sidewalks, trailed the hum of traffic, and pressed on through the noise of town. He dodged strangers wove between speeding cars and braved streets that would have frightened younger, stronger dogs. Witnesses would later recall seeing an old gray dog limping along the shoulder of the highway or curled beneath the awning of a bakery during a sudden rain. Each time someone tried to help, he vanished again, slipping back into the night, driven by something deeper than hunger or fear. Inside the hospital, Chloe lay silent in her bed, eyes fixed on the window, where rain streaked the glass. She would not eat. She would not smile. "I miss Lincoln," she whispered once, so softly that Susan almost thought she imagined it. The doctors said her recovery was too slow. They could treat the infection, but her spirit was fading. Susan turned away, so Chloe would not see her tears. On the 7th night, a hospital security guard noticed a shape near the front gates. An old dog, drenched and trembling, his gait unsteady. His ribs pressed through his wet coat, his legs shook with exhaustion. Around his neck clung a dirty yellow scarf, once bright, now caked with mud. The guard squinted at the flyer pinned to the lobby board. "Lincoln," he called softly. The dog lifted his head but did not move, eyes locked on the glass doors that led to the hallways inside. And when those doors slid open, Lincoln surged forward. He staggered every step, a struggle nails clicking desperately against the tile floor. Nurses shouted. The guard reached out, but Susan, just stepping into the corridor, cried out, "Don't stop him!" "Lincoln." The dog stumbled to a halt at room 24. Inside, Chloe sat upright in bed, her eyes blank, her spirit hollow. Then she heard it, the familiar rhythm of paws tapping against the floor. She turned, and when the door opened, Lincoln was there. His body shook violently from exhaustion, his breath ragged. But in his eyes was a light no storm could put out. He gave a single soft bark. "Lincoln." Chloe screamed, her voice cracking open with joy and disbelief. Tears poured down her cheeks as she threw her arms wide, IV lines tugging at her small frame. Lincoln collapsed against her, burying his head in her lap tail, thrashing weakly as if trying to make up for the days apart. Chloe clung to him, sobbing into his wet fur. "Don't ever leave me again," she cried. And for the first time in a week, her voice was full of life. From that day on, the hospital made an exception. Lincoln stayed. A small cot was placed beside Chloe's bed, and he rarely moved from it. Doctors marveled at the change. Chloe began to eat. She began to smile. Her strength returned slowly at first, then more steadily. The nurses whispered that the dog was better medicine than any prescription. One evening, as Lincoln rested with his head on the blanket draped across Chloe's legs, she stroked his fur and whispered, "You found me. If you can fight through storms and streets to be here, then I can be strong enough to go home with you." Lincoln sighed, a deep, warm sound, his body finally relaxing. And in that quiet hospital room, girl and dog made another promise: to keep finding each other. No matter how far, no matter how hard, they would always find their way back. Chloe recovered faster than any of the doctors predicted. After nearly 2 weeks in the hospital, she was finally able to come home, back to the small house with the wind chimes on the porch, the old oven that always smelled of warm bread, and Lincoln waiting at the door. He was there just as always, stretched across the entryway as if he had never left. But this time he didn't spring up with the energy he once had. His tail thumped lightly against the floor, his eyes still bright, but his steps were slow, his body heavy, every movement carrying the weight of years. Chloe wrapped her arms gently around his neck and whispered into his fur, "I'm home. Thank you for waiting." Yet in the days that followed, she began to notice. Lincoln wasn't the same. He slept longer, often breathed heavily at night, and more than once he left his food untouched. Each step seemed to bring a faint creak from his joints. One morning, when Chloe wheeled herself out to the porch, Lincoln didn't follow. He simply lay in his corner, head resting on her old blanket, his eyes quiet and thoughtful. "Mama, is Lincoln okay?" Chloe asked softly. Susan knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. He's getting older, sweetheart. Just like people do, sometimes the body slows down even when the heart still wants to run. Chloe said nothing. She understood, but her heart rebelled against the truth. She wasn't ready to say goodbye. One late afternoon, as the two of them sat outside, a small bark echoed from the back fence. Lincoln lifted his head, ears twitching, but didn't bark in return. Curious, Chloe and Susan wheeled around to the garden. There, hidden among the tall grass, was a puppy. Its fur was a pale golden color, ears drooping, as if undecided whether to perk up or fall down. It trembled, one paw scraped belly so thin you could see each rib. A puppy. Chloe gasped. Did it get lost? Susan bent down gently, scooping the small body into her arms. While she cleaned the scratch inside, Chloe stayed by Lincoln's side, stroking his back. Look, she whispered to him. We've got company. Lincoln gave a soft groan, not hostile, not guarded, just aware. His eyes lingered on the puppy with an expression both serious and knowing, as though he understood this wasn't just chance. It was change. The little one, curious but timid, waddled toward Lincoln. It sniffed his fur, then, with sudden boldness, curled right against his leg head, resting across his paw. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Lincoln's eyes lowered. Then slowly his tail wagged once. I think he knows this is a safe place, Susan murmured. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Lincoln, though slower, seemed to find a spark of energy. He rose more often, following the pup around the yard, guiding him with patient steps. When the puppy stumbled, Lincoln nudged him upright with his nose. When the pup barked too loudly, Lincoln gave him a look so calm yet commanding that the little one immediately quieted. It was as if the old dog had taken on a new role. Not just Chloe's guardian, but a teacher. Chloe laughed more than she had in months. She named the pup Sonny for his golden coat, and the way he seemed to arrive just when her heart had grown darkest. She spent hours watching the two together. Sometimes Lincoln and Sonny lay side by side on the grass, one gray and weary, the other restless and bright, like an old grandfather with his eager grandchild. One afternoon, Chloe witnessed something that made her giggle until her sides hurt. Sonny had stolen one of Susan's socks from the laundry basket and dashed across the living room, tail wagging in mischief. Lincoln rose with a groan, lumbering after him. When he caught up, he placed one heavy paw right on top of the sock, looked Sonny dead in the eye, and gave a low, authoritative rumble. Sonny froze, then dropped the sock immediately. Chloe clapped her hands in delight. He's teaching him manners. Mama Lincoln looked back at Chloe, almost as if to say, "See, I've got this under control." In those playful lessons, Chloe noticed something deeper. Lincoln wasn't just tolerating Sonny. He was testing him. When Sonny tugged too roughly at Chloe's blanket, Lincoln stepped in, nudging him away until he learned gentleness. When Sonny bounded toward Chloe's wheelchair, Lincoln blocked him at first, then slowly allowed him closer once the pup calmed down. With every action, Lincoln seemed to be asking the same question: will this little one take care of her when I no longer can? Sonny, clumsy as he was, seemed eager to answer yes. That night, after laughter and play had faded, Chloe sat beneath her star-printed blanket. Lincoln stretched on one side, Sonny curled on the other. She stroked Lincoln's graying muzzle. "You know," she whispered, "if someday you're not here anymore, I'll still be okay, because you've already given a piece of your heart to Sonny." Lincoln opened his eyes, heavy but tender, and nudged his head into her palm. No words were needed. Both understood. Time could not be stopped. Seasons turned, bodies grew tired. But love, the kind of love that takes root quietly and deeply, always finds a way to carry on. That summer, as the cicadas sang in the trees and golden sunlight spilled across the roof of the little house, the doctor delivered the best news Chloe had heard in years. Her lungs were strong again, her body healing better than anyone had expected. For the first time in so long, it was safe for her to go on a short trip beyond the familiar walls out into open air, where the world stretched wide. Susan didn't hesitate. She looked at her daughter with tears brimming in her eyes. "I think it's time we go somewhere special, sweetheart. And of course, both of our four-legged boys are coming too." Chloe glanced at Sonny, who by now had grown into a lively young pup, legs too long for his own good, always bounding and tumbling. Then she turned to Lincoln, resting near the old fan, eyes half closed, but still glimmering with quiet devotion. She smiled. "If Lincoln can go, then I want to go too." The following Saturday, their old minivan rolled out of town carrying 5 hearts, 1 mother, 1 daughter, and 2 dogs, who had become more than pets. Susan had lowered the back seat to make a soft bed for Lincoln. He lay there quietly, his body tired, but his eyes watchful. Sonny, meanwhile, refused to sit still. He jumped from seat to seat, pressed his nose against the windows, barked at passing cars, as if announcing their grand adventure. Chloe clutched her worn teddy bear in her lap, the one that had stayed with her through every hospital visit. The wind slipped through the open window and lifted her hair cool and fresh. She stared at the passing fields and whispered almost in disbelief, "The ocean, is it really blue? Mama, as blue as in the pictures." Susan's eyes stayed on the winding road, but her smile was soft. "Bluer than you can imagine, my love." By the time the tires rolled onto sand, the sun was high above, painting the world in dazzling light. The first sound Chloe heard was not voices, not traffic, but the steady heartbeat of waves crashing against the shore. Wide, endless, alive. Sonny shot out of the car like a cannon, his paws scattering sand, his bark ringing across the beach. He darted at the foam, then leapt back when the waves chased him, his whole body wriggling with joy. Chloe burst out laughing, the sound bright and musical, like bells carried on the wind. Susan pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wet because it had been so long since she had heard her daughter laugh like that. Lincoln remained by the van, his legs too stiff to run, but his gaze followed Chloe and Sonny with soldier-like focus. Every now and then, his tail gave a small, slow wag. Chloe wheeled closer, picked up a seashell, and set it gently on Lincoln's paw. "This is our first souvenir from the ocean. You'll keep it safe for me, won't you?" Lincoln raised his head, pressed his nose into her palm, and breathed out softly. Then Chloe said something she had never dared before. "Mama, will you push me closer to the water?" Susan hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded. Together, mother and daughter rolled toward the shore. Sonny bounded back, barking encouragement. The waves crept up, kissed the wheels of Chloe's chair, cool and playful. She tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and let the ocean wind fill her lungs. For the first time, she felt not like a fragile child bound by limits, but like part of something vast and free. Behind them, Lincoln stirred. His legs shook as he pushed himself up, but he moved step by deliberate step until he stood beside them. Chloe reached down to pat his head, her smile wide. See, Mama, we're all here, all together." The hours that followed became memories etched deep into the heart. Sonny dug holes in the sand so big that only his tail stuck out, making Chloe laugh until she gasped for air. He stole Susan's hat and raced in circles until Lincoln, moving with the slow dignity of an old general, intercepted him with one well-placed paw. Chloe clapped her hands. Squealing Lincoln still knows how to keep him in line. At one point, Sonny tried to chase a flock of seagulls. They scattered into the sky, and he froze in awe, staring upward with his mouth open as if he'd never seen anything so magical. Chloe leaned against her wheelchair armrest, giggling uncontrollably. Sonny thinks he can fly. Lincoln, lying nearby, gave her a long look-tail swishing once, as though to say, "Don't encourage him." That only made Chloe laugh harder. Later, Susan spread a blanket on the sand. They sat together eating simple sandwiches. Sonny begging for crumbs, Lincoln resting quietly with his head in Chloe's lap. She stroked his ears, watching the sun sparkle across the waves. "This," she whispered, "is the best day of my life." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in orange and pink. Susan pushed Chloe's chair closer to the shoreline. Lincoln trudged beside them, Sonny bounding ahead, barking at every splash. The four of them stood there together, framed by the light, the salt air, the music of the tide. For that moment there was no illness, no pain, no ticking clock. Only now. Only love. That night they settled into a small seaside inn. Chloe curled under her familiar star-patterned blanket, the ocean breeze slipping through the open window. Sonny lay curled at her feet, already twitching in puppy dreams. And as always, Lincoln lay by her side, his head resting on the mattress, his breath deep and steady. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, sketching 3 shadows, 1 girl, 1 young dog, and 1 old guardian whose loyalty had carried them through storms and silence. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In the stillness, all of them knew they were living the most beautiful days of their lives. After that summer by the sea, nothing was quite the same anymore. And it didn't have to be, because Chloe had grown, not just in age, but in the quiet strength of her heart. She was no longer the little girl who shrank from strangers' eyes, who flinched at every small bump. She had begun to trust. She had begun to believe in herself. And most of all, she had begun to feel strong again because of Lincoln. Lincoln was fading. His steps had slowed, his naps grew longer, his once bright eyes clouded with time. But still he tried. Every morning he dragged himself to the doorway to greet Chloe when she woke, his tail tapping softly like a whispered promise. Each evening, even when his legs trembled, he shifted to make room for Sonny curling beside him. He gave what he could until the very end. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves turned shades of amber and gold outside their little house, Chloe sat on the sofa with her old quilt spread across her lap. The air was calm, the room filled with the warm hush of twilight. Lincoln lay beside Sonny on the rug. His breaths came slow, his eyes half closed. Chloe reached down her hand, resting gently on his back. She stroked him with all the tenderness in her small body and whispered, her voice softer than the rustle of falling leaves. "You know, if the day ever comes when you're not here anymore, I'll still be okay. Because I know you've left a piece of your heart with Sonny." Lincoln opened his eyes. They were dim now, but steady. With effort, he lifted his head just enough to press his muzzle into the palm of her hand. Nothing more was needed. No words, no sound, just understanding. The next morning, when the first light slipped through the curtains, Susan found her daughter still asleep on the sofa, head tilted, one small hand resting in Lincoln's fur. Sonny lay nearby, eyes wide, ears perked, as if he too sensed what had happened. Lincoln lay still, peaceful, as if in sleep. No pain, no fear, just gone. When Chloe stirred, she didn't scream. She didn't collapse in grief. Instead, she sat quietly, her eyes glistening, and whispered, "Thank you for staying with me for so long." She smiled through her tears, a smile that carried both heartbreak and gratitude. That afternoon, under the broad shade of the old tree in their backyard, the very place Lincoln had loved to rest in the sun, they laid him to rest. Susan dug the soil with careful, trembling hands. Chloe sat nearby, holding the seashell they had picked together on the beach, now weathered and pale. She placed it gently on the fresh earth, along with her quilt, folded neatly, but still carrying the warmth of countless nights. Sonny sat close, unusually still, watching every movement, as though he knew something sacred was happening. Susan squeezed Chloe's hand. And for the first time in her young life, Chloe truly felt the weight of loss. But she also felt something else. Something Lincoln had left behind. Love. Because love, she realized, does not vanish, even when life does. The seasons turned. Winter draped the yard in silence. Then spring came, and blossoms bloomed around the tree where Lincoln rested. The grass was greener there, as if nourished by memory itself. By then, Chloe was different. She was still in her chair, still fragile in some ways, but no longer fragile in spirit. She wheeled herself outside with Sonny trotting by her side, leash in hand, laughter spilling into the air like it had once done when Lincoln first entered her life. She told stories about astronauts and distant galaxies, and Sonny wagged his tail as though he understood every word. At night, when the house quieted and the wind slipped through the window, Chloe pulled her quilt close. The same quilt that had covered her through sickness and storms. The same quilt she had laid across Lincoln's back when he was tired. Now she hugged it to her chest, not just for warmth, but for memory. It was a reminder. A reminder that once in her life there had been a dog who loved her with all his heart. A dog who had waited, who had searched through storms, who had given every ounce of strength so she would not face the world alone. The quilt smelled faintly of home, of safety, of Lincoln. And in the quiet hours before sleep, Chloe would close her eyes, feel the soft fabric under her fingers, and whisper, "Good night, Lincoln. I'll carry you with me." Outside, the old tree swayed in the wind. Sonny would stir in his sleep, ears twitching, as if answering the call of a mentor he had once known. Susan would look in on her daughter and smile, seeing not just a fragile girl, but a strong young soul who had learned the deepest truth too early in life, that love never dies. And so even though Lincoln was gone, the little house was not empty. It was full of memory, full of laughter, full of the kind of light that only grows when love has been given freely. Because the blanket was never just a blanket. It was proof. Proof that love had once lived there. Proof that love still lived on. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love. Because the bond between a child and a dog never truly ends. It lives on in every memory, every smile, and every tomorrow. And if you believe in that kind of love, stay with us for more stories like this.